we got a great one today, for a change. And this time I mean it, because Heather McGhee from our pantheon of great guests returns. Well, it's been quite a week. You should know that I'm taping this opening on Friday, so I don't know how Trump's the Army's birthday parade went, and the nationwide No Kings protests. But I have a great conversation with Heather, who is the best, so I'll get to that quickly. But we've had a week of protests in LA and now all around the country, and Fox keeps playing the same clips of the driverless cars on fire. Somebody, an idiot or idiots, started those, and the LAPD is arresting the morons who commit violent or destructive acts. But of course, the vast majority of protesters have been nonviolent, and they're speaking out against a very violent thing. And the whole point of Trump calling out the National Guard and the Marines was to escalate the situation, and that they did. What's not surprising is how Americans are reacting. Trump is underwater by 11 points, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll. And I predict that it will get worse for him as Americans understand who they are sweeping up in these raids. ICE is arresting hardworking people who contribute to their communities. They're raiding garment factories, the Home Depot parking lot where day laborers are finding work so they can feed themselves and their families and keep a roof overhead. We heard that ICE was going to arrest criminals, but it turns out that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than citizens who are born in America. So they're picking up immigrants who are valued members of their communities. I'm no doubt saying stuff you've already heard. So I'll go now to our conversation with Heather McGhee on a host of issues, including immigration.
You've got this story that Trump sold, which was that it was going to be mass deportations, but it was only going to be the bad guys. You actually had a lot of people from immigrant families saying, yeah, let's get those bad guys out of here because they're giving us a bad name. And of course, he'll keep us because we started a business and we're employing people and we're law abiding and we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and we contribute to Social Security. Literally, you had significant numbers of Latino, Asian, fewer African American, but still more people of color voting for Trump, not just in spite of his mass deportation agenda, but rubber stamping it and saying, yeah, that's probably a good thing because he's talking about those criminals.
So enjoy this interview with Heather McGhee. It's a great one, for a change. So when did affirmative action start in this continent for white men? When was that? About 16.
Upon Christopher Columbus's first step. When he was treated with anything other than a hostile terrorist.
Well, I put it 1620s or something like that.
I would say actually, technically, in terms of the creation of race-based laws that privileged people with white skin over everybody else, yes, that was in the early 18th century in the wake of a series of cross-racial servant class uprisings that had united people of color, enslaved Black Africans and indentured, soon to be considered white Europeans. And then in Virginia, they first issued race laws to privilege whites over people of color so that they would side with the elite and think that they could be part of it one day.
Okay. But wasn't it earlier, just when did the first slaves come?
To Virginia, 1619.
Yeah. So I would say that's when, if you have slaves then, you sort of have affirmative action for white men.
That's right.
Yeah. And that lasted till, technically just for white men, I guess, until... I don't know, when did the Civil Rights Act get?
Yeah, well, I mean, we first had the Equal Employment Opportunity Act and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the mid 1960s, and so you began to see people being able to sue successfully when they'd been discriminated, having
Hmm.
a part of the federal government that dealt with those kinds of claims, and companies beginning to have some kind of policies. And really what they are, Al, and I think this is often overlooked, is to check the bias that's already there, right? The right
Right.
wing has been so successful in shifting the idea, at least among their most ardent followers, to the idea that the bias is, our whole society is biased towards women and people of color and other minorities. Ultimately, what the research shows is that without the kinds of programs that require a second look, that require a diverse pool, that even say, hey, it's a good thing to have diversity in these offices, in these classrooms, the bias towards white men still exists.
Right.
And so that's what they're doing. Yeah.
You once gave an example of just when applying for a job, if the name is a black sounding name versus a white sounding name, that the black gets called back, what, about half as much or something like that?
That's right. And the one that's really shocking is that if the white applicant has a criminal record, they are still as likely to be called back, more likely to be called back than a black person with no criminal record. Right? So,
Okay. That's funny.
yeah.
That's funny. So let's talk about DEI. What is DEI really, and why is it needed, and what's the history of it?
Yeah, so diversity, equity, and inclusion really began in corporate workplaces in the 1970s and 80s as the population and therefore the customer base of companies was becoming more diverse, and leadership and boardrooms began to realize that the bias that had so often made the employee base and the management, so often biased towards white men needed to change. And not only that, and I think it's really important that we distinguish affirmative action, which is really about recruiting and changing the makeup of a classroom or of an office. We are talking about what DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs really are, honestly, and this is the big secret. They're kind of like remedial integration education for white people more often than
Hmm.
not. Right. So if a DEI program in, Colgate Palmolive is often when somebody says it's time for us to do a program to talk about the history of women in the chemical industry. And they do this kind of,
Hmm.
it's like, Women's History Month or Black History Month, but it's specifically for the industry that the company is in. And it's sort of like, listen, we know that everyone's education in this country is woefully inadequate and biased towards, George Washington being the only important person in history, right? So, and we know that most white Americans come to the workforce coming from mostly white social networks and 75% and above white
Sure.
neighborhoods. And so sometimes the workplace is the first time that folks have ever interacted with someone from a different background. And there can be conflict and misunderstanding and prejudices. And so often, DEI is really a program to help facilitate integration in the workplace for the majority group, right? Because minorities and women have always had to navigate the majority space, and the opposite is usually not true. So, if you ask a DEI officer what they're doing, so often they're creating educational content and workshops to educate white men about what it is to live in a globalized society.
Wow. So what does it look like in corporate America, DEI now? I mean, and is the Trump administration putting pressure on
The
companies?
Trump administration has decided that one big way for them to divert and deflect and distract from their economic agenda of redistributing wealth to millionaires and billionaires and grifting all over the world is to claim that everything in America is being destroyed by an acronym yet again, right? And this time it's DEI. And so immediately, Stephen Miller, whom we may remember from the, deck of cards of henchmen from the first Trump administration,
Mhm.
a little Nazi apologist who has been on this white supremacist crusade for a long time.
Mr. Cruelty is the point.
Exactly. He's been one of the key architects of it, but the idea has been to suddenly say out of nowhere and with no legal basis and no evidence that diversity, equity, and inclusion is illegal discrimination. And therefore, any program or policy that a school or a corporation, a law firm has that's DEI is now the basis for the Trump administration going after you. And that going after you could be trying to pull your funding, as it has for grants, for example, federal grants that may have been for, first generation college students or people from underprivileged backgrounds who are amazingly, going after Alzheimer's and various rare kinds of cancers. Their funding has been summarily pulled. You've seen law firms, elite law firms that have had DEI programs. Again, you really can't understand American law if you don't understand race in the law. So this is very important educational programming that is often directed at white male lawyers.
I can imagine that there are a lot of law firms that have now finally have Black partners, and that's kind of now the rule, I would think.
Yeah. Well, you might think, but actually less. I looked up the statistic because, you would think with the way that the Trump administration has gone after top law firms that, they've just become these bastions of white male underprivilege, and less than 5% of big law partners are Black. We still have a long way to go. Anyway, this attack has been used as a way to justify damaging these institutions of knowledge production outside of the Trump ideology, right? If you think about it, Adam Serwer did a great big piece in the Atlantic about how this is all an attack on knowledge, the attack on Harvard, the attack on law firms, on medical research, on scientific research, firing all the scientists in so many federal agencies, trying to sort of dumb down the U.S. military's training, trying to attack libraries. All of this is a desire. This is an autocrat's playbook to make sure that the only source of knowledge is what the regime wants it to be, sort of what has been approved by the regime's ideology.
Is Harvard the only university that fought back, or is it just the first that fought back?
It's the first that fought back in this way. It is the biggest and richest, obviously. It is the one that, frankly, represents in so many ways. This is hard for me to get out of my mouth because I actually went to Yale and I've been trained to say that Harvard is, overblown in its importance. But
dare I say, New Haven. That's what that's what Harvard people say of Yale. That we just say, right. Dare I say, New Haven.
So, but Harvard is older than the country, right?
What, 1609, 1631, something like that.
Something you're supposed to know, not me.
Yes.
But it's a place where that has for the world represented the best institute of higher education. And so many technological breakthroughs, so much research has come through Harvard, which is why when they were attacked, they immediately said, you can attack us, but who's really going to be hurt is all of the premier and flagship hospitals in Boston, Boston Children's, Mass General, right? These are the places where our research and our partnership is keeping those hospitals going. And so again, I know it's sort of easy if you didn't go to Harvard to say, well, why should I care? But the very idea that we would stop funding medical breakthroughs and scientific breakthroughs that are today saving lives and tomorrow will save more. Because of why exactly? Because of Trump's vendetta. Some people say that it's, places he wished he had gotten into college. I don't know what it is, right? But the excuse is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or the first excuse was anti-Semitism, but they sort of moved past that.
I think it's because it's a symbol of all of it.
Hmm.
They went after Columbia. But I think Harvard is the symbol, and also Harvard was the first to reject it,
Hmm.
and I think that's it too. So now it's a war.
Yeah. And it's a great use of public resources, right? Honestly, Al, what he's been doing in the name of attacking diversity feels like what you do to a country when you invade it and you want to destroy it, right? You try to crush its flagship institutions. You fire all its civil servants. Expel the scientists. Try to bring it backwards. You send its economy into chaos. You break its bargains with other countries and try to ruin its standing in the world. And then you grift, right? And then you try to, as much as possible,
Enrich yourself.
enrich yourself.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? What he's. I mean, what has most surprised you about this administration?
What has most surprised me about this administration is the speed and volume of the attacks on everything we hold dear, right? I'm a policy wonk, by background and training, right? So
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
but maybe your audience doesn't know it, right? So
Oh,
I mean,
that's it. That's it. Yes, this is
I
for the audience. That's right.
that's right. I think about laws and all the different programs and initiatives and policies that could be changed that have far-reaching effects in the country. And I am impressed by the way in which 3 to 4 times a day a new policy is issued. And it's like before there was this sense in the Trump administration that there was sort of nobody at home and he was sort of wandering around in his, tracksuit eating cold French fries in the White House. And you were like, what's going on in there?
That was the first term.
That was the first term. But now it feels like this entire right wing infrastructure of people who are pouring through old statute books in the Federal Register and realizing that there are these arcane laws that he can invoke, that there's this one regulation that needs to be reversed, that there's this, and it's all over. It's from the environment to education to healthcare. Multiple times a day, something happens that is aimed at sort of repealing the 20th century, or at least the second half of it. It's a shocking volume of changes. So many of them, obviously, are being knocked down by the courts, but the overwhelming effect is to put the opponents, which, by the way, is the majority of the American people who are opposed to so much of what's happening, on their heels, to sort of get anticipatory compliance from people who work in government, who are just worried about being able to keep their jobs, and to make the private sector and civil society feel like he's all powerful.
This month is Pride Month, and they in New York anyway. The corporate sponsors have a few of them have shied away, and Target gave money but didn't want to be listed
Mm,
because they're afraid of
yeah.
retribution from Trump.
Let's be clear, in the first administration, corporations knew that this was someone who had lost the popular vote, who was wholly unfit for office. There were, massive and very well publicized protests in the early days between the Women's March and the marches and protests at the airports around the first Muslim ban.
There's going to be a massive demonstration this week. I have a feeling.
Absolutely, there is. It's being known as the No Kings rally,
Right.
and this is coming on top of the days of demonstrations that have happened in Los Angeles against people, workers, waiters, busboys, delivery drivers, school teachers being, snatched.
Seamstresses and
Exactly, being snatched out of their homes in front of their children. The climate of fear that is going on in immigrant communities. So immigrants and their allies have been marching in LA, and we know that Trump is gleefully sent in the military to try to attack our own people's First Amendment rights.
to deliberately escalate the situation.
That's right. So, in the first administration, the corporations were in many ways a beachhead, of saying, we're going to side with the people and our customers and our shareholders over this one guy, right? This time, by going after corporate law firms first, by lining up the big tech billionaires behind him in the inauguration, he has managed
Boy, those
to,
guys showed up, didn't they?
oh,
My
just
God, did they
what a
fold?
visual. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, right? They have a ton to gain from his tax cuts. They have a ton to gain from, regulations being cut, antitrust, right? In many ways, this is a response to the previous Democratic administration saying, you know what, we need to regulate AI, we need to regulate crypto. We can't have, too big to fail tech companies. And in many ways,
And
Democrats
monopolies.
and monopolies.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And so, in many ways, Democrats doing what Democrats are supposed to do made them lose the tech billionaires. And on some levels, it's like good riddance. But on the other hand, it has meant a trickle down effect of corporate fear and bedwetting in boardrooms. Not for everyone, right? For every example of a Target that stopped its DEI programs on day one of the administration, you have Costco that doubled down, and
Right.
Target has seen week after week declines in foot traffic as the Black faith community, Black churches have organized boycotts of Target since Trump came into office and they stopped their DEI programs. Whereas Costco has seen a massive increase in their memberships because they said, we said that diversity was important to our bottom line, 2 years ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, and we're sticking with it.
Wow. That's heartening, isn't it?
It is. It is. Because listen, I mean, this is the thing that gets me. It's something that I am very, very sure about. It's that diversity is this country's superpower. It is in our best interest. It is the fact of our lives, right? We are the world's most diverse, large, industrialized democracy. And that has time and time again been to our benefit. Whether it is just the research that shows that diverse groups function better, that they come to breakthroughs better, that they're more innovative.
Talk about that. Talk about that some more, because what is the? I mean, it's kind of so logical, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is. Basically, let's think about it, right? So if you've got a problem in front of you, I think of it like, a tangled ball in front of you, and you bring to that problem, 8 people with the exact same kind of background, education, outlook, way of seeing the world, way of being treated by the world. They're only going to see one part of it. But if you bring to that problem people with all of these different backgrounds and ways of seeing, you're going to see more. And that's really the kind of synergy that creates innovation and breakthrough. It's a Columbia business professor used to call it, it's the tension that comes from being with people who are different from you that creates the productive friction that creates breakthroughs. And so, as I was saying, diverse juries remember more facts, right? Because you may remember a different thing if it speaks to you from a different part of your life, or
Wow.
maybe and so put it all together, and that diverse jury is going to remember more facts. You have companies with diverse boardrooms being more profitable, on and on and on. And it makes a lot of sense, right? From a business perspective,
So if
right?
your client is guilty, you probably want an all-white jury.
That's right. The all-white jury, right? And so we've seen this time and time again. And the history of American breakthroughs, it feels like every other day we find another hidden figure, right? Somebody who was a woman, an immigrant, a person of color, who actually was the backbone of a major technological advancement. Gladys West is a hidden figure, right? That phrase comes from the Black women who were the mathematical
Oh,
backbone
right.
of the
The
space
moonshot.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Gladys West was a Black woman whose mathematics helped to create GPS, right? How often in our days do we rely on something that we did not know wouldn't have been here were it not for a Black woman, right? So it's
Well,
just this
thank God for
idea.
her.
I thank God for her. It's the only
Yeah.
thing I actually would like to keep about the internet. But I think that we have a real opportunity right now to firmly define who we are as a country. Are we a country that embraces all of humanity and the best of one another? Or are we segregationists again, right? Because this is what's the opposite of diversity, right? It is segregation.
Well, what's going on in LA and in terms of this attack on immigrants is just exactly what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. So this administration campaigned on mass deportations, and somehow, because the commercials and the campaign speeches and the rallies so emphasized criminal migrants, right? Created this dehumanized
From insane
caricature.
asylums, and
Yeah,
he said that once, and that became his build the wall of the second term, which is he just said that he just made this up that they're emptying their prisons and insane asylums, and he said it once, and then that was it, and it became a fact, and he repeats it every fucking time.
that's right. And so you've got this story that Trump sold, which was that it was going to be mass deportations, but it was only going to be the bad guys. And so you actually had a lot of people from immigrant families saying, "Yeah, let's get those bad guys out of here because they're giving us a bad name." And of course he'll keep us because we started a business and we're employing people and we're law abiding and we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and we contribute to Social Security. Literally, you
Mm-hmm.
had significant numbers of Latino, Asian, fewer African American, but still more people of color voting for Trump, not just in spite of his mass deportation agenda, but rubber stamping it and saying, yeah, that's probably a good thing because he's talking about those criminals. And then they come after him, right? There was a story in the Times today about the Brazilian migrants of Martha's Vineyard who have been the economic backbone of that tourist island for the past 10, 20 years. And there have been massive raids there and the economy is shuddering. And you have business owners saying, I didn't think they'd come after me and my workers.
Mm. In the vineyard.
Oh, Martha's Vineyard. You have it, in Iowa. And right, of course, Al, you know this from Minnesota, right? These rural places where immigration has created a full economic turnaround.
And created communities that wouldn't be healthy communities without it.
That's right, where they desperately needed new people because the factories closed and the young people left. And these communities have been revived. And then, the majority of people in them voted for Trump, and they're surprised when, Carol, the waitress at the diner, is deported.
There's a town in Minnesota that's the perfect example. Wilmer, it's the county seat of the largest turkey producing county in the largest turkey producing state in the country. And the town works because of Latinos and Somalis. And one of my Senate pages was an amazing Somali girl from Wilmer, Muna Abdullahi. So a year after Muna left DC, left the page program, I invited myself to her high school graduation in Wilmer. There were three speakers: Muna, the valedictorian, who was a young woman from Ecuador, and the class president, who was of German Scandinavian descent.
Yes, those old immigrants. Yeah.
Yeah, and that pretty much represented the makeup of the entire class. And when they handed out the diplomas, Muna was first, Abdullahi, ABD, Abdullahi. So she was first. And they told everyone, hold your applause till the end. And the principal said, Muna Abdullahi, and the place went nuts with applause. The families were in the bleachers, stomping their feet, and they did it for every student. And this was just a town that worked, and it wouldn't work without the immigrants. It just
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't.
Yep. And today there's a new travel ban, as part of Trump's absolutely racist and xenophobic and self sabotaging attempt to limit who enters the country. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. I mean, massive swaths of the world the idea that just travel from those countries is banned, right? The idea that they are attempting to stop all international students from coming to Harvard and then from any other school. They floated the idea of banning all of Chinese students from any university in the country. It's insane.
The Trump administration is going to keep losing these lawsuits, but it doesn't matter because they'll file another lawsuit, and those students won't know if they're going to be able to go to Harvard, if they're going to be able to be allowed in, so they'll go somewhere else, I
That's
guess.
right, right. And why would you even put, if you've worked your whole life for this one shot and opportunity, why would you put it in the hands of the whims of a madman?
And it really helps Harvard because these people, by and large, pay the full boat.
Yep, yep.
It's an
That's
economic
another.
loss for Harvard as
Right,
well, but
right.
of course, that's Trump. I shouldn't even say that because Trump might hear it.
No,
But
he knows. They
he
know. I
knows.
mean, they
He
know,
knows.
right? That's part of it. Was really about trying to attack Harvard economically. But again, who really gets hurt? And this is, the core idea in my book, The Sum of Us, is that when we have these racist, illogical policies, they end up hurting white people too. They end up hurting our entire economy and our entire society. And this administration has been a textbook example of the kind of self sabotage that happened when white towns drained their segregated swimming pools rather than integrate them. That's what's happening right now to our entire economy.
In the Sum of Us, that's the cover of Some of Us is so great, which is jumping into a pool.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. These towns in all over the country did that, right? They,
Yeah.
instead of integrating their pool, they decided to fill it in and plant over it.
Because they were so wedded to the myth of white supremacy that if it couldn't just be a public good for white people, they would destroy it. And in so many ways, that's what's happened to our economy in this sort of slow shift we had in the wake of the civil rights movement to the kind of, market fundamentalism where we didn't believe in New Deal public solutions anymore. We believed in the markets and we said, go it on your own, families with healthcare and retirement and education. So we drained the pool of public resources after the civil rights movement once the public became fully, all of the public, not just the white public. And that's what we're doing right now. Literally, in the name of too much diversity, we've decimated the National Institutes of Health, right? So we are going to have cancer breakthroughs, Alzheimer's, kidney breakthroughs, right? All of these different major diseases, cardiovascular, are not going to happen because the research is not happening because there's too much diversity.
Yeah, and look at all these. I mean, that's because of Harvard. All their research projects are in
Yeah.
danger.
Yeah. But we had, the National Institutes of Health has been fully thrown into chaos by the Trump administration, separate from the attacks on Harvard and their research stuff, right? So you have the National Institutes of Health, for some reason, has been a major target of the administration's cost cutting and freezing. I was reading about a first generation college student from rural Appalachia whose grandmother had died, was suffering with Alzheimer's but had been an alcoholic all her life, and she was studying links between Alzheimer's and alcohol use, right? Something that could affect any and every family in
Mm-hmm.
the country. And because her grant was one of those grants that was particularly making sure that people who are first generation, low income families. This girl was white. This young woman who was a scientist in this project. It was canceled, right? So just like that, right? Anything that is looking to expand the pool, right, of people who are
And was that
contributing to our.
Doge? Was
That
that
was
Doge?
Doge. Yeah, that was Doge. That was Elon Musk. And that was a Trump administration executive order saying to halt any funding that's too woke in the federal government.
Like USAID,
Mm.
which is,
Well, don't get me started on that.
well, yeah. I mean, Gates said it. Bill Gates said it's the richest man in the world killing the poorest people in the world.
Yep. And speaking of, right, this, why? Again, I mean, some people say that the reason why Elon Musk wanted to go after USAID first was that that agency and that funding played a big part in supporting the NGOs that were against apartheid. And,
Oh my God. How about when the president had the South African president in his office and showed the bogus picture from the Congo and said it was from South Africa, and then it was white crosses of Afrikaners who'd been killed by black South Africans. I mean, it was a picture from, it was the exact 180-degree opposite. It was pictures of graveyards from a graveyard from the Congo.
Yep.
Of black
people being killed by Belgians and Europeans.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to say, as Elon Musk and his, right-wing message board of a brain has tried to communicate to the world that there's some kind of white genocide going on, is of course a total projection of what has actually happened throughout history, which is, genocide of African people and colonized peoples by Europeans. And so we are in the upside down for sure. And it's dangerous. But again, Al, it's driving this zero-sum narrative that is trying to scare the majority of white Americans into thinking that their enemy is immigrants, people of color, their neighbors, and not the billionaires who are raiding the treasury to line their own pockets, who are cutting the largest Medicaid cuts in history.
Let's talk about that big, beautiful bill for a second. I mean, I can't say how awful it is, and it's going to, of course, the Republicans who are against it are against it because it's going to increase the deficit, and their cure for that is to cut Medicaid more.
Yep,
which is
that's
unbelievable.
Right. So the cuts. Let's talk about Medicaid first, right? Medicaid is something that millions and millions of people rely on in this country. It is a modest government health care plan, usually for pregnant women who don't have insurance, so that they can have prenatal care and delivery, for people who work in low-income jobs where their employers just don't care to give them health care.
The ACA expanded it by
That's right.
Putting it in the state, and how many states that were red states have adopted it because it works.
That's right.
For rural hospitals.
It brings money to rural hospitals, even though it's part of Obamacare, this Medicaid expansion that sort of lifted the income threshold of who could qualify for Medicaid to just a regular working class job. A lot of red states have said, you know what, this makes economic sense for us because healthcare matters to our economy. We don't actually want a whole bunch of uninsured people.
And it passed by referendum. I mean, in other words, people in the state went like, we want this.
Yes, people want health care. People don't want to not be able to afford to go see a doctor. And the affordability crisis, things being too expensive, is the non-racist reason given for electing Trump, right? That things were too expensive, inflation was too high, healthcare costs were right up there in the list of complaints. And we're talking about cuts to Medicaid in this Republican bill that would lead to 10 million people losing Medicaid, 8 million people additionally becoming uninsured, affecting hospitals and doctors.
Under ACA, if somehow people lose their ACA,
it's both, right? So direct cuts to Medicaid, as well as some repealing of the expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And then SNAP, right? Food stamps, which an enormous number of people in this country rely on. This would be the largest cut to food stamps in history. And this is bad for families and children, schools, right? Where kids would go hungry. It's also bad for farmers, right, who really rely on the food programs in the Farm Bill.
In Minnesota, they passed free breakfast and lunch for everybody. Isn't that cool?
It's very cool. Yeah. And, that's a state thing. So it wouldn't be affected by this, hopefully. But a lot of state spending is supported by federal revenue. And so we'll see. I mean, the thing that is so scary about this moment is that we know that already decisions made in just the first few months of this administration are costing lives around the world and at home. And that poverty will go up, that homelessness is going to go up. that hunger is going to go up, right? Food banks are seeing massive increases in demand already, especially around places where there are a lot of federal workers, right? I mean, you have this administration gleefully destroying American jobs, right? I thought it was supposed to be a job creator. And all these middle class jobs of public servants have been sort of, just as I said, gleefully destroyed. And you know that there are going to be these terrible consequences no matter what. No matter what the courts say, some of these decisions are already happening. And for me, this is a cost around the world to families who are white, black, and brown of racist politics in America.
Let's talk about immigration, because what we saw in Los Angeles was the president deliberately escalating a situation to get it out of hand.
Yeah. I mean, we have, as we were saying before, we have this president who campaigned on mass deportations. And we know that so much of our economy relies on immigrant labor, from the construction to the restaurant industry to home care and childcare, right? All of these sort of backbone industries of our society rely on immigrant labor. And so often it is undocumented. Because why? Because the United States Congress refused to reform our immigration laws, right? So, I mean, we have to always remember that there's a different path. It's not like there could be open borders or there could be mass deportations. We could have a modern 21st century immigration system, but we don't, right? And so we have this system of failures that we
Why
do
don't we?
have.
Why don't we? Is
Well,
both
Al,
parties?
you were in the Senate. Why don't we? Why
We
don't we?
tried.
Well,
We
exactly.
tried, and we passed it in the Senate with 68 votes,
Wow.
and the House. And
Who was running the House then?
well, what
Republicans, I'm sure, right?
Republicans were running the House, yeah, and but it was Laura Ingraham and those people who just whipped up this hatred of immigrants. And remember that Eric Cantor lost his election. He lost a primary. He lost a primary to a Republican who was out racisting him. And that was it. It was over. They were never going to pass an immigration bill.
Yep. So you've got this infrastructure that creates zero-sum stories that says that immigrants are a threat to native-born Americans, that, they're coming for you, your job, your way of life, your wife, your children. And then that whipped up base stops Republican elected officials from doing their job to make sound policy in the US. And so you have this sort of vicious cycle of, dysfunction that then creates a sense of crisis in the cities, right? Because you do have a lot of people who are coming in and the courts are overloaded and there is no rational asylum system and all of this. But of course, that's just great for Republican politicians to always be able to run on an immigration crisis. And then we have Donald Trump, who has been with his ICE agents who, why can't they just wear uniforms? Why are they wearing gaiters with their, pulled up so that they're basically like masked,
Right.
unmarked men snatching people off of the street, not informing their families?
Well, the cruelty is the point.
That's right, Al. That's right. And so finally, a community stood up. And I think we need to take a moment to bear witness to the bravery of the protesters in Los Angeles, because they knew that, if someone is undocumented and they're protesting for the safety of their community and their family and themselves, and they get arrested, they could be deported, right? When we protest, you and I, as citizens, Al, we think, okay, if we get arrested, that's part of our civil disobedience. That puts us in a long line of anti-war protesters and civil rights protesters. But they are risking, their very lives to protest. And then the administration says, oh, good, we've got a bunch of brown people, young people in a Democrat city. Let's throw in my army and see if we can create some chaos.
And he's thrown in Marines now.
I mean, You know what this is, right? I've been in touch with a number of, of military veterans who are organizing against this, right? Because this is not what they signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do not see these folks as the enemy, and so there are a lot of military families and veterans who are speaking out. Groups like Vote Vets, who are saying, this is not the mission.
So this immigration war, and that's kind of what it is deliberately making it as difficult as possible for people and as dangerous looking and as scary as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking people off the street and just in masks and handcuffing them and taking them off.
Deporting them to countries that they're not from. I mean, can you imagine the nightmare, right, of being separated from your family and ending up in a country, in a prison system?
Well, in El Salvador,
in the Congo when you're actually from Somalia, and I mean, it's just in Sudan when you're actually from Zimbabwe. I mean, it's just it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare, and it's the Statue of Liberty is weeping, right? Lady Liberty is weeping. This is, I mean, also like Donald Trump is married to an immigrant. I'm just like, what are we even?
Two of his wives.
Two of his wives, Al. Two of his wives were immigrants.
My wife was born in Maine.
She would say you're from away.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Wait, I don't want to leave people feeling like there's nothing they can do and this guy's all powerful and everything is hopeless, right?
Right.
Most importantly, you can sign up with basically any local civic organization, your Indivisible, your Color of Change, your Move On, your lots of other groups, and because we have already had more Americans protesting this administration than we had the last one. It hasn't been as reported in the media or in social media, but the people who track these things have seen more protests in more decentralized places all over the country. And it matters. It helps you feel better about exercising your values in public. It puts the administration and its enablers on notice. It helps corporations and those who are licking their fingers and putting it up in the wind and saying, which way is the wind is blowing? Or are people outraged, or are they just not paying attention? It all matters. Judges pay attention to protest. The courts do. It all matters. So please go out and make your voice heard.
Well, thanks.
Thanks, Al.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.